Congressional Democrats and Republicans are selecting their new leadership following the midterm elections. House Republicans yesterday chose California Congressman Kevin McCarthy to serve as the minority leader.
He fended off a challenge from Freedom Caucus member Jim Jordan. McCarthy joined CBS This Morning earlier and spoke about how the president's rhetoric influenced this year's midterms.
Tone matters a lot where we're going, but I think what happened, and you watched it in that presidential election, in campaigns, people battle. And I think people were getting frustrated on both sides of the aisle, if you watched in the last presidential election, for Republican and Democrat. They want someone who would fight through. And they made a decision, and the president hasn't changed from who he was as a candidate to who he is today. But I think there's always a way to bring more people together.
All right, CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in Washington and joins us. So, Ed, in a tweet this morning, the president wrote, quote, "The inner workings of the Mueller investigation are a total mess. They have found no collusion and have gone absolutely nuts." He also went on to say they are a disgrace to our nation and don't care how many lives they ruin. These are angry people, including the highly conflicted Bob Mueller. McCarthy promises to resist Democrats' agenda. That's Kevin McCarthy. But will he be able to protect the president from the onslaught of investigations that the new majority is expected to launch come January? And I think the first
presidential harassment sounds
presidential
like.
harassment is what they're trying to get that hashtag going. And I think also, Ed, that the first thing on their agenda is talking to Mr. Whitaker, the acting attorney general.
That's one of the first things on the agenda, yeah. Republicans can do very little in the minority besides scream, shout, and maybe try to hold up government funding bills when it comes time to debate those types of things, if their votes are needed at least. And look, for a lot of these Republicans, it's going to be a bit of a culture shock and a big adjustment because they've been elected into Republican majorities, and now they've got to adjust to life in a depleted minority. McCarthy is right that they can try to defend and raise concerns, but a lot of that, frankly, will be done on the airwaves, and there's not much else really that they can do to stop it from happening in committees or potentially even on the floor of the House in whatever fashion it might come up.
So Republicans have chosen their leadership, but the Democrats won't be doing that until after Thanksgiving. Yeah. Some Democrats have expressed their lack of support for Nancy Pelosi. She seems confident that she will resume her role as Speaker. Well, she will become Speaker of the House. Give us an idea of who the opposition is, why some people oppose her, and why she has support from others.
So as far as we know, it's only about 17 to 20 who so far have publicly expressed their opposition to her continuing on. It's people like Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, Ed Perlmutter of Colorado. There are a handful of newly elected Democrats who, of course, campaigned against voting for her and really can't be seen as supporting her in some way. But we don't know the exact number of potential anti-Pelosi votes, and partly because I think a lot of those people who would be willing to entertain an alternative know that, at least as of right now, there is no alternative. It's still just her. And until somebody else steps up and mounts a challenge to her, they can yell, scream, and shout all they want about it, but their only option may ultimately be Nancy Pelosi.
So at this point, there are no names as a possible challenger?
Well, I've heard Marsha
Oh, there's
Fudge,
plenty of
right?
names. There's plenty of names.
Like, that are legit, like they could be challengers.
Well, could be
Right.
challengers. That includes, yes, Marsha Fudge, as Vlad mentioned, from Ohio, a senior member of the Congressional Black Caucus, somebody who has expressed concern about her leadership in the past, Pelosi's leadership. You also look again at Tim Ryan, also from Ohio. He's the guy who ran against her back in 2016 and was able to siphon off 63 votes, which was the most significant challenge she'd ever faced to her leadership. But neither of them has even formed a formal exploratory committee, if we want to call it that. They've merely sort of suggested to reporters that they're thinking about it. But, you know, I'm thinking about a ham sandwich for lunch. So, you know, until they get serious about it, you know, we're left to just wonder. And I think that is a sort of a frustration of those who don't want to vote for her. And it's a big annoyance to Pelosi and her team, because if there is nobody, then in their view, everyone should just put up and shut up.
Yeah, and I think, Ed, you will be able to have that ham sandwich, whereas people like Marsha Fudge and others may not get that seat.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about this. You know, and I'm reluctant to use this term blue wave because it was bandied about a lot before the midterms. But Democrats do say that they've seen, I mean, there's still something like, I think, 7 seats that are still up for grabs. And Democrats continue to make gains. The vice president, in comments that he made just yesterday, seemed to suggest that it wasn't a blue wave. Let me ask you, How would you characterize what we saw in the midterms, given that they're still making gains and we still have a couple of seats out there?
You guys live in New York or work in New York, and so you're familiar with how water can kind of seep through a building if there's a plumbing leak.
Yes.
And I think what we're seeing here is a slow-moving blue leak or flood that is essentially spread across the country. It's happening slowly because the count is so slow in a lot of these California districts, and there's so many outstanding or provisional ballots yet to be counted in some of those districts. But look, two more big Democratic calls last night in the 3rd District of New Jersey. Tom McCarthy, who was a chief architect and supporter of the tax cut plan that the president wanted, went down to Democrat Andy Kim, meaning there's now only one Republican congressman from the state of New Jersey, where there used to be more than, I think there were 5 or 6 at one time in recent history. And then out in California, we were able to call 2 more races for Democrats who won narrowly in the Simi Valley of California and in the sort of agricultural heartland of California. Those are 2 areas that were seen as reaches, and Democrats have prevailed. And in the next few days, we're probably going to see races called down in Southern California, especially Orange County, where Democrats are going to eke it out just barely. And that will mean that Orange County, once the sort of home base, ground zero for Reagan Republicanism, no longer has a Republican in Congress. And so if you don't consider that some kind of blue wave or flood or invasion or whatever, then you know, you don't understand how this works. And this is pretty symbolic and, you know, a signal that from the East Coast to the West Coast and in the middle, there are ways in which Democrats have been able to pull it off. And it should be a real worrying sign for Republicans that they've lost what were once really secure seats for them, going into a presidential election cycle when turnout among independents and Democrats who would vote for these kinds of people is likely, just based on historical trends, to be even higher, meaning they may be able to hold on to and then build that majority in 2 years.
Indeed. All right, Ed, for us in Washington, I expect to see a picture of your lunch on Instagram later today. Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.